So we have the Other Side NDE, and we also have Crossing Over NDE. So we interview people about their near-death experiences. And then I also have my own personal podcast, Ethereality. I work with that with my brother.
Today's guest is Nella. I met Nella in 2024 at the IANDS International Association for Near-Death Studies Conference.
And at first I was really apprehensive. I was raised Christian, and I felt like this concept, this foreign concept, was potentially going to be threatening to my narrative. And I looked into it anyway, and it blew me away. When I had that eye-opening moment, it was like, oh my goodness, this was always the plan. This was always going to be my purpose. And so if I would have been given that information, it would have taken me off the path of authentically discovering that for myself.
And so now for my conversation with Nella. Hey everyone! I'm really excited to let you know about the Science and Spirituality salons I'm now hosting. During these intimate events, a scientifically verified psychic medium will give all of you readings, and I will give a talk on the science and evidence that changed my mind about an afterlife. This will also be an amazing opportunity to get to meet some of you in person or virtually, and to share more about all the science and data that transformed my worldview and got me through my worst days. These can be hosted in your home, in a nearby cafe with a private room, or they can even be virtual. I've hosted a few already, and they were really special, fascinating, emotional, evidential. So if you're interested in getting a small group together over dinner, brunch, drinks, coffee, to learn more about the science and to get evidential medium readings, send me an email at hello@wtfjusthappened.net and put science and spirituality. I am speaking with Nella. I met her at the IANDS Conference, International Association for Near-Death Studies. She is a host for the Other Side NDE podcast, and she has her own podcast, Ethereality. Welcome, Nella.
Hi, thank you so much.
Thanks so much for coming on. I'm excited to see you again. It was really fun getting to spend time at the conference. And so I'm just so excited to tell us a little bit about both podcasts. I know one you're a host on and one is your own podcast. So why don't you just tell us a little bit first about both of them?
Yeah, absolutely. So we have the Other Side NDE, and we also have Crossing Over NDE. So I work with a team of people to put both of these channels on. Both of them, they have NDE in their name, so we interview people about their near-death experiences. And both channels have different demographics, so that's what I do for work. And then I also have my own personal podcast, as you mentioned, Ethereality. I work with that with my brother, actually. And it's been a journey, to say the least.
No way. I didn't know you did it with your brother. That's so fun. I love that.
Yeah. It's a very divine thing, I feel like, because he had his spiritual awakening shortly before I needed help. And then he has all the skill set necessary for doing some editing and whatever he does. But it seemed to be very orchestrated.
Wait, so how did you you got your role with the Other Side NDE first, and I know they have a whole series of podcasts along these topics. How did you even get that role? What happened?
I had never heard about near-death experiences before, actually. I was bookkeeping, and 2020 came around, and I was like, all right, I'm just going to go into my own business, bookkeeping. And then it was like, I don't know if you've ever spent all day with numbers day in and day out, but I literally felt like I was a zombie and there was no satisfaction and fulfillment in life. And one thing that does bring me joy is writing. And so I had a friend of mine who was like, well, you should get on Upwork, which is a freelancer platform. And I decided to do that through quite a bit of resistance. I'm not going to lie, but I did. And the very first proposal that I sent out was for a cryptocurrency YouTube channel to write the script. And it was fun. It was a topic that I was interested in, and to get paid to learn about something to me seemed like a pretty good deal. But after a while, it was unsustainable with the amount of time that I put into studying the material in order to be able to teach it and how much I was getting paid per script. It just did not level out. It was not sustainable. So I told David, he's the guy that I'm working with currently on the Other Side NDE, that I can't. And he's like, well, that sucks because good freelancers are few and far in between sometimes. So he said he had other channels that he needed help working on. But like I said, I had never heard about near-death experiences. And at the time...
And wait, David, he also had the crypto podcast. These are all his. Okay.
Yes. The company runs a good amount of YouTube channels, and there's a lot of them in different niches. And so he said, I have these channels that I need help working on, and we can kind of just job carve and see where you can fit on the team. And at first I was really apprehensive. I was raised Christian, and I felt like this concept, this foreign concept, was potentially going to be threatening to my narrative. And I looked into it anyway, and it blew me away. After I was exposed to the first 3 stories, and I still remember their names. It was Vicky Noritic, Scott Drummond, and Mark McDonough. And after that, like, it was like a pivotal moment in my life. After that, everything was completely different, dramatically.
First of all, I just want to say, I just always think that's so impressive when people have a very set belief set and they're willing to explore and challenge it, even if that's scary. I mean, I find that a very impressive trait in people. Not everyone does that, you know? And
well, when I was a teenager, I had this curiosity, but it was like a conviction too at the same time, because I was heavily immersed in what we would call the New Age movement. However, it never affected my faith by any means. I just kind of labeled things in my head as like good and bad, right or wrong, or things that I didn't really want to dive into. However, I was comfortable being around because I was secure in my faith and I was protected, I guess, is how I looked at it. But I recognized, because of so many of my friends being immersed in this, would we call it a movement, I guess? The New Age movement, yeah. That there was a lot of things that they would talk about that I knew that my church would condemn, that I didn't really feel like there was anything wrong with. And then the more that I grew up and was learning about energy and manifestation and crystals actually having a frequency that we can measure and all these things, and I'm just like, I really feel like there's too much division between these two communities. And so even at a young age, I felt this when I say draw, I felt this like calling. I felt this calling to bridge the divide in some way. And I wasn't really sure what that was going to look like, but I knew that manifestation was a part of it because I didn't see anything spiritually or from a Christian standpoint, spiritually wrong with manifestation, especially too because there's so much of that in the Bible where I was just like it did not make sense to me that there was any sort of division there. So I actually wrote a blog post for my mom's website that was, I'm very proud of it to this day, actually. And it was just all about how manifestation is actually a biblical concept too. And so can we stop fighting about it or like demonizing the other side of the fence? And so it's interesting that I had that perspective before I was even introduced to near-death experiences.
It is interesting. And I guess you were really young when that happened. You were in high school, right?
Yeah.
So you were raised Christian. Manifestation is considered wrong in Christianity. You'd been told. Like, what parts had you thought might be wrong? Manifestation or certain parts of the spirituality you were exploring?
I mean, manifestation's frequently associated with like crystals and spirituality and whatnot, right? And from a Christian standpoint, it's like, well, pray to God, ask for God to bless you with things. And it's not the power in your own hands. It's outsourcing that power into something in the clouds that is going to essentially work to bring good things into your life on your behalf, right? And so it's kind of that surrendering of that power in Christianity, which I still think there's a lot of power in surrender, don't get me wrong. However, the fact that the New Agers would say, okay, well, no, you actually have this power. You know, we're created in God's image, so we are creators in our own rights, right? And it was like that I am God mentality that Christians, you know, blow out of proportion and try to demonize and everything that creates that division.
You mentioned these 3 NDEs that really kind of challenged your original viewpoint on afterlife and religion. And you remember them to this day, which is amazing. What happened during them? And what stood out to you and what was so impactful about them?
So Scott Drummond, and gosh, man, that man is just so authentically warm. He has an energy to him that is just a very pleasant energy. But Mark McDonough, I never actually spoke to him or interviewed him personally. However, he was in a fire, and it was like a house fire or something. But I feel like I could relate to that because my house burnt down when I was 15. So for me personally, it was really profound. But I think the most interesting thing that stood out about all 3 of them was Vicky Naratek. She had been blind, and when she had her near-death experience, she could see visually.
Have you read Dr. Kenneth Ring's research?
I have not read that, no.
Do you know?
However, I've heard a lot of good things.
Yeah. He is a researcher who studies cases of blind people having sight during near-death experiences. So all of you listening, I highly recommend his book. Was she blind since birth?
I believe so.
So I don't know if you'd remember this. This might only be a question for her. How did she know it was sight?
Yeah, that might be a question for her.
That's Yeah, I'm so fascinated to study more about sight during NDEs. I mean, because that's just indisputable. I mean, that's a fact. If they're able
Mm-hmm.
to give, at least in Dr. Ring's book, they could give actual verification that they saw certain things. And it's, and also all of you, if you're wondering the same thing that I just asked Nella, Dr. Ring does address it. And for those who are blind since birth, what they said, and I'm not saying this is at all Vicky's experience, but because I don't really know hers, but what some of them said was they had memories of it from previous lives. Because, a lot of times when you go have near death experiences, you get a lot of memories. And they said they knew that they'd seen like this before. And some kind of were at first confused and noticed like kind of different sensory input coming in. And then one or maybe two had like very, very limited sight where they could see shadows. And they said that was just completely increased. And I guess where they were seeing colors too. And you spoke about manifestation and that was something always important to you. Have you had any luck or any kind of what I always call the what the fucks, remarkable verified experiences of manifestation?
The only thing that comes to mind is my brother's manifestations lately that have been just like, what the fuck, right?
Yeah.
But those are not mine, so it's just like,
Okay. What are steps you then do to manifest?
manifestation is entirely about belief, right? It's you set an intention and then you believe that you will receive it and then you receive it, right? But it's this grueling process that you have to break through subconscious limiting beliefs before you can actually find success in it. And I definitely am not going to sit here and pretend like I'm a manifestation guru by any means. But so I feel like the concept of it is really quite simple, but the inner work necessary to be successful at it is quite complex. I think that it requires a certain amount of shadow work that a lot of us are uncomfortable doing because it's uncomfortable, just simple as that. But to me, what's most interesting is not necessarily like the success I've had with it or anything. It's more so just the concept in itself, right? The fact that we have the capacity to influence our environment determined based off of our mindset. And that brings us back to the fact that we are creators in our own right. And I think that has a lot to do with our experience on the other side when we have near death experiences as well. There's a certain amount of our, like, each individual's personal experience on the other side that is a variable. Whereas there's a lot of common denominators, as I like to call it, where there's certain aspects of near death experiences that are all the same. And so if there's this element of this like ether, right, that we are potentially projecting into our experience, in a sense, that is manifestation.
Now, you said there are a lot of aspects of near-death experiences that are all the same. What are some of those aspects?
The experience of exiting the body, a lot of people have similar ways in which that happens. And then hovering over your body and being able to watch the scene unfolding. A lot of people experience the ability to move through space instantaneously. They can think about a loved one and just immediately be in the room with their loved one and see what they're doing at the time in which they are disembodied. There are people who experience a void, right? Which is, as they experience, is not necessarily void of anything, but a vast space that is everything. So I feel like the term for that is a little misleading. However, there's also people who experience a tunnel, right? And they experience a light and they see spirit beings or loved ones that have passed. And what's wild about this is that with so many people across the entire globe having these experiences, all from completely different backgrounds, different cultures, different spiritual beliefs, popping into this dimension and having this underlying thread of common denominators is statistically impossible. And so that leads me to believe that there's a lot of validity to these experiences. Like I know one of your questions is, could it be imagination? Are these near-death experiences real? And I, beyond a shadow of a doubt, believe that they are real for that fact alone.
It's always very hopeful when I hear how much people do think they're real, people who delve in so much. Yeah, I actually, I want to talk a little more about both of the podcasts. So you have your own, and then as you discussed, you work for the Other Side NDE. Explain what both of them are each about and the differences and similarities between the two.
Yeah, absolutely. So the Other Side NDE and Crossing Over, as I also mentioned, Crossing Over NDE, those channels that I work on with my team both have their own demographics that are quite different. For the Other Side NDE, we ended up accidentally kind of pigeonholed into just traditional near-death experience stories and found that our audience doesn't really like it if we post anything that doesn't fit that category. And that was really disappointing because we believe that there is so much profound information in all spiritual experiences, like out-of-body experiences, shared death experiences, after-death communication. There's just so much valuable information out there. Not being able to share those kinds of stories on the Other Side NDE was disappointing. So we started Crossing Over NDE to have a broader horizon of stories that we could share. And that's really exciting to me. And on Ethereality, my channel, I actually participate in the conversations. So that's really fun. On the Other Side NDE and Crossing Over, we are trying to create more summarized content for people who don't want to sit down and watch an hour and a half video, or like 5 parts all an hour long to hear all the facets of people's stories. So we try to summarize the stories down to like the most profound, most important aspects to share. So in doing that, we cut the interviewer, out of all of the videos. And so really I just kind of sit and listen. But on Ethereality, I get to participate. And that's the biggest difference, I would say. A lot of the guests that I have on Ethereality are people I've already interviewed for Crossing Over or the Other Side NDE. Some people I've interviewed a couple times, or I mean, Vinny I've interviewed 5 times already now at this point. So by the time they get to my podcast, we have a rapport, like we have a relationship, and it's conversations with a friend. Like I've actually seen in my comments where somebody's like, why isn't this like an interview style conversation? It's like, because it's a conversation. I'm just a conversation with a friend. And so I'd say that is my favorite aspect about it, and probably the biggest difference between all of them.
Are there any guests you've had on either of them that just, you're like, whoa, that completely changed my worldview? That's just incredible. I mean, I know you mentioned the first 3, but those are the first 3 NDEs you ever heard. What about just guests you've had over the years?
So I would say that my favorite near-death experience stories, the first three that come to mind are Vinnie Tolman. As I said, I've interviewed him 5 times. And David Ditchfield and Brooke Grove, actually. So Vinnie was dead in a body bag for 45 minutes and came back without brain damage. Like, that's a very long time. And didn't you did like a 5-video segment with him, didn't you?
No, I haven't interviewed
you haven't? That was
him.
somebody
No, I wonder
else.
where that is. I mean, I know I saw him present at IANDS, and I'm definitely going to reach out to him to have him come on. I'm just super
Oh,
backlog.
that was Heather Tesh, actually.
Oh yeah, well, Heather Tesh is going to be a guest on. Yeah, so everyone listening, go listen to that. Heather Tesh's because
Heather Tesh.
she's fantastic. So I
She
definitely love
is.
supporting all of our little podcast community. So.
Absolutely. And yeah, so that story was really profound. He learned on the other side from, oh gosh, what was his name? It's so funny. It's so funny when he hears his spirit guide talk to him when I am spending time with him in person, because I can always tell when he's like listening. He kind of looks off in the distance a little bit and then looks back and is like very matter of fact. And I'm just like, oh yeah, you're talking to your spirit guide right now. But so in his near-death experience, he learned all these insights, and the way that he articulates them is beautiful. It really is. Yeah, his story was very profound, in my opinion. But also David Ditchfield, he was dragged under a train, and he had his near-death experience where he saw some amazing things, but he experienced these spirits, these angelic beings healing his spirit body. And when he came back, he created paintings of what he had seen and composed music. And he had never even thought to do that before. He had never created a painting before. But the pieces are beautifully done. Like, you could look at that and be like, this guy's been painting for a lifetime. But I just love the fact that he was inspired to create those pieces as a result of his near-death experience. Also, Brooke Grove, she is easily one of my favorite people. She's a very well-spoken, well-educated woman who was very science-minded. She was on her way to a PhD when her near-death experience happened. And afterwards, she dramatically changed trajectory in her life and is now working in the spiritual community. But one of my favorite things from her actual experience is just simply how playful she was. Like, as this light being, this spirit orb thing that was just floating around the cosmos, just like, this is fun. Just her little childlike sense of wonder as she navigated this dimension. And she encountered these lights. She encountered the spirits of her unborn children. Wow. And that was so profoundly beautiful. That impacted me on a whole nother level. Can never forget that one.
And it matched up, like, when she ended up having her children. Like, if, let's say, she met, like, 2 boys and a girl, she ended up having 2 boys and a girl that looked like the one she saw on the other side. Is it like that kind of, or?
So she didn't actually see, like, their physical bodies or the form that they would take when they incarnated. She just saw them as lights. But she knew them. She knew them, and she didn't know how she knew them. But when it came time when she had the first child, she had this sense. She felt like she knew. But as the child grew older, he actually thanked her for choosing him. And she was like, what? What do you mean? And he said, before you came back to your body, you chose me. And she was just like, oh my gosh. I mean, what more validation do you need? Like, it was beautiful.
That's crazy her kid said that. I love those verifications. That's just, you can't really explain that with quote unquote normal means. I mean, maybe he'd heard her talk about it, but also, like, when you start delving into that, I'm assuming he did not hear her talk about it and then said that. Just, I feel like every time I ask those skeptical questions, I can't say for a fact till I talk to her, but every time I ask, like, the rational explanation, I'm always told that's actually not right. So
it's
and
fair.
That didn't happen that way. So I'm like, okay, because I mean, I will have to ask her, did he overhear that? Because little kids make up stories around their parents' stories and as they're learning. But I don't know. I feel like every time that's been investigated so far, that has not been the answer.
I think that's fair. Definitely fair. Either way, these three have made a pretty big impact on me for sure.
I'll have to listen to Brooke and I think you said David. Again, I heard Vinny at IANDS, and I'm going to try to get them all on the podcast.
Yes, you should definitely.
So do you still consider yourself Christian? And what's kind of been your trajectory with with your beliefs transforming or viewpoint transforming?
I would say it's hard for me not to identify as Christian. However, if I had to choose, I would say no. But that's mainly because of everything that comes with that and the dogma. However, I believe everything that Jesus said and stood for still, absolutely.
Like, what are some of the things Jesus said and stood for? Because I think for people who are not Christian or religious, you don't really necessarily know the real stuff. You hear a lot of the propaganda and, like, as if it's a lot of negative kind of, homophobic, sexism. And I'm sure that's not all there is to it, but that's kind of what's been the loudest lately. So,
yeah. Jesus was a rebel. He didn't come here to create a religion. He came here to combat the religious groups that were at large at the time that he lived. And they killed him for it. So I think it's interesting that nowadays we see him as this core pillar of Christianity, whereas he stood for love and light. Essentially, he basically taught all the things that we learn in diving into near-death experiences about, like, the fact that there's oneness, we're all connected, and we have a loving Father, if you want to call God or source that, but the concepts are all the same. The answer is all just love, right? And I understood that as a Christian too. I understood. That's why I liked the second. That's why I liked the New Testament more than the Old Testament, because I felt like the Old Testament just had like a bunch of hate and murder and all this awful stuff that was just being edified, and the New Testament was just like love. And so it's interesting because when I considered myself Christian, I was constantly in this shame cycle because nobody is perfect, right? And we're all sinners and yada yada, and you need to repent and atone for your sins and all this stuff. But being so hyper focused on the things that I was not doing right and all the rules and everything, I lacked the capacity to truly love, to live in that outward loving expression, because I was so inward, just like trying to survive, mentally navigate my experience, my capacity was so wrapped up. And when I discovered that this near-death experience world, right, was not actually threatening to my narrative at all. If anything, it validated everything that really truly resonated with me and invalidated the stuff of dogma. And when I started living in that, like walking in that and breaking out of the shame cycle, is when I actually experienced for the first time in my life, like an external and internal alignment.
If you want to learn how I went from being a skeptical atheist who thought there was zero chance of an afterlife to a skeptical atheist who thinks an afterlife is highly probable, come check out my books. WTF Just Happened. Have you had any pushback from your previous Christian community about your interest in, near-death experiences, spirituality, however you define it?
The only person that has an opinion that I value, that I was previously associated with in terms of my religious influence, was my mom. And she's very open-minded. And so it was interesting because as soon as I started going down this rabbit hole and was like, this is profound, Mom, you need to listen to this, she did. And she didn't hyper focus on the certain aspects that could have been triggering or anything to that extent. She actually started questioning her own stances on things. And I think that that's really important because when we're raised in religion, we are basically taught not to question the narrative. And so we sort of adopt this lens that has been cultivated for us, and it's just stay in line and, don't question things, and this is, live your life with our lens and you'll be fine, basically. But people are not fine doing that. Like, you have to be able to shatter the lenses that were made for you in order to create the lens for yourself that is actually going to feel like you are in the driver's seat of your own life. And so I feel like me doing that with this near-death experience journey that I've been on and sharing that with her has actually helped her to do the same. So she's still identifying as Christian. And like I said, on some level, I do too. However, I don't really associate with anyone that I think would negatively judge me, from my previous community or association.
Religion can also be a cultural identity. It doesn't necessarily even have to be a belief in God. Like, I'm Jewish, but I'm an atheist, and I'm very culturally Jewish, So I'm an atheist who thinks there's an afterlife, interestingly, which, people sometimes have questions about. But I'm like, you don't need a God. And I could be wrong, definitely I wouldn't think it's like a Judeo-Christian God, but, right. I like to say, I never would have thought there was an afterlife. But really, I just think it's always, I don't know, like religion, it seems like the question of an afterlife brings in so many other, what I would say, unnecessary layers. Not unnecessary for personal cultural experiences or morals. I'm not going to question the role religion plays in people's lives. Some people, it's incredibly important to them. So no judgment there. But I guess really, to me, the question isn't, is there a God? Who's the creator? It's really, is consciousness created by neurons of a brain, or is it entangled and downloaded by them? And to me, that's really the only question about whether there's survival of consciousness. And I also even think, as I've said, I guess, before on my podcast or in my books, even if consciousness is created by a brain, and I no longer think that's the most logical hypothesis, or conclusion, I guess. But even if it is, then we probably still live multiple lives. Because if you think of the concept of eternity, eternal big bangs, big crunches, to me, that's really the question. But yeah, as I was saying, even if it's created by a brain, I still think we most likely have multiple lives. Because if you think of eternal big bangs and big crunches, it seems almost statistically impossible that another set of brain neurons wouldn't create another consciousness in person, or complicated consciousness. Maybe in like 10 trillion years will be another highly evolved species that are not humans. But it makes almost no sense statistically that another set of brain neurons would not create something else that you got to experience being the way you've gotten to experience being, Nella, even if it's a bunch of brain neurons that creates your conscious awareness. So I'm like, no matter what, I think consciousness continues in some form. And I think most likely, like pretty much 95% convinced it's downloaded by a brain, not created by a brain. But, I mean, that's...
I like that. Downloaded by and not created by. Yeah.
Yeah. And I think
I could get behind that.
Yeah. And to me, that's really the afterlife question. And, not necessarily is there a God. I'm just like, that seems like irrelevant. That almost seems like going way too many steps ahead. Like we really can't fully understand at all how this non-local consciousness would work. And I think like it's sort of like skipping multiple steps. And I don't know. I mean, I think if there is a type of God, any human definition of God we've ever heard would not be at all how it is, So
I've interviewed a lot of people who had near-death experiences who had asked the question directly to source, what religion is right, and I remember somebody specifically saying the way that he responded, or it, I guess, responded was like with a little laughter, and kind of the way that you would talk to a child that asked you if the moon was made of cheese.
Oh, funny. Okay.
Yeah, just like, I mean, not in any condescending, but in like a loving way, was like, well, here's how it is, and I love that, because we can rationalize all we want, but at the end of the day, wrapping our minds around something otherworldly with our limited capacity of our human brains that has been created, or has grown and developed within this dimension to understand this dimension, it's like it's kind of a silly thing that we think we can have these definite answers, but nobody really knows. We'll know when we get there.
And we might only know a portion, I mean, we still will be leaving this one specific body to going to, the other side, another dimension. Could just be one of who knows how many dimensions. I mean, I know string theory, I believe, thinks there are 10, and M theory thinks there's 11. I forget exactly. I'm so obsessed with string theory, I should remember, but I don't remember the exact number. But, we could just be going to one dimension. There could be like limitless other dimensions that we could explore, and time could tie into that, where like, in another whole iteration of a Big Bang, there could be different experiences with interdimensionally. I mean, who knows,
Absolutely.
I just think whatever it is, it's more multi-layered and complex than even we could begin to understand. And also, we don't see reality here. We see a tiny portion, and then reality is distorted through our brains, like the way we experience
it is.
Yeah. Like we don't see the center of things. I think that's fascinating when our brain fills in what the center should be. And there's all these, like, I know, again, I've said this probably on the podcast before, so sorry, listeners, you're hearing this again, because I'm just so blown away by this. Like, I read a book way before I even started studying this, because I've always thought it was interesting. It was about like magicians and how they use neuroscience for magic tricks, because they know how our brains distort things, and they can play with those illusions to create magic tricks. And I love that.
Well, yeah, I mean, our right hemisphere is the hemisphere of the brain that takes in all of the external stimuli, but it's our left hemisphere that considers that, isolates the most important aspects, and then creates our lens of reality. right? Which is significantly less than our actual input, right? And it's also specifically chosen based off of our narratives or what we personally feel like is most valuable. And so that function really does limit us quite a bit.
Yeah. And one thing, argument, sometimes I'll hear people who, materialists will say is NDEs can't be true because some people will describe different experiences. I'm like, well, let's take two people on Earth and tell them to talk about their experiences. It would be so drastically different depending on where they are. You could have two people that it sounds like they were describing different universes. And then you could even take two in the same neighborhood, same building in the same neighborhood, same block. And you could get two completely different experiences as well. Not as different as, let's say, like a village in Thailand versus someone who grew up in Paris, but you still, every person would give a very unique experience based on their perceptions. And I can't believe near-death experiences wouldn't be like that, as well as they do have similarities. And again, there are certain concrete similarities we would have if we were describing our Earth life to someone who knew nothing about it, like eyes, nose, smelling, tasting. There are certain things that would just be the same. And I guess I find in that sense NDEs so parallel our own reality, where there's layers of interpretation and personal as well as certain concrete things that are the same, the way things.
Yeah, it's the exact same on the other side. Absolutely.
Yeah. Well, I would ask you, if you had a chance to have an NDE, would you?
So I think it's interesting that people seem to idolize this experience, right? People who've never had an NDE listen to them and they're just like, gosh, I'd love to have that experience. But I think what a lot of people don't realize is that having a near-death experience, for somebody who has not been exposed to the concept, the experience is earth-shattering. It literally shatters a person's identity because what they learn on the other side is so drastically different from the narratives that society and religion and everything spins for people. And when you have that sort of identity shattering experience, it's not comfortable. It basically fast tracks all of your shadow work and you have absolutely no choice. It's just in your face and you have to deal with the facts that all the things that you thought were facts are no longer, and who you thought you were doesn't exist. And you have to kind of carve out through this dissonance, this new identity, this new lens to experience life through. And it is not easy for people. I mean, for me personally, because I have interviewed hundreds of people about their near-death experiences, I've seen thousands of stories, I've heard thousands of stories. For me personally, I feel like on some level I have had one, just because I've aligned so intimately with so many people's experiences that I've had a glimpse of it. So in terms of having that profound sort of life-changing, otherworldly experience, I don't really feel like I need to have that. And I also know that you can access those kinds of experiences through other means and not having any sort of bodily trauma. But I mean, if I had a choice, I would still say yes. Just for the I believe that I could have had a near-death experience when I was a teenager, and I just don't have any memory of it. And looking back, I realized that if I would have had a memory of that experience, that it would have completely changed my trajectory way earlier than it was planned to happen. And the fact that I discovered this work for myself over time in a more organic way, I'm grateful that I don't have a memory of it. But now, looking back, if it gave me clarity on that experience, then I would. I'm also not necessarily against having difficult physical experiences or emotional experiences. Like, I feel like the people are so drawn to the light, right? That we try to sort of shun the darkness. But I've discovered that you can't have balance when you are only focused on the light. Like, you have to embrace and find a love and appreciation for the darkness just as much as the light. And so if I had the experience of, that trauma, I would appreciate it. But I do think that I could gain clarity on that through other means, though. And I would like to try.
What happened when you were a teenager, as much as you're comfortable sharing? And why do you think you had an NDE that you don't remember?
I believe it was an overdose. I remember laying in my bed, and nobody knew that I had taken any drugs. And it was pharmaceuticals. So it was nothing like hallucinogenic or anything like that. But I remember lying there in bed, and I felt like my life force leaving my body. Like, I knew that it wasn't like falling asleep. I was like, this is very distinctly different than falling asleep, because it wasn't the first time I had taken these drugs either. So I was lying there, and I was like, okay, so I'm dying, and that's okay. I had a complete peace and comfort about it. I mean, I wasn't very happy as a teenager either. So the idea of dying and leaving this dimension was not awful. I was like, all right, this is fine. Let's go. Let's go see what's on the other side. Because I was raised Christian, so it wasn't on purpose. I didn't try to kill myself or anything, but unalive myself or anything. But I woke up, and I was surprised, actually. I was just like, wait, hold on. How does that make sense? I literally felt like I didn't have an out-of-body experience, but I felt like my life force leaving my body, and I didn't think that I was going to wake up. So I just kind of resumed life like nothing ever happened.
Do you think you had an actual NDE that you don't remember for whatever reason? Or do you think you just didn't go far enough along the trajectory before you came back?
I think I just don't remember it. I've thought about it a lot, and I know for certain that I couldn't have that information at that time.
Wow. So you feel you had it and maybe like made the choice, or guides made the choice for you, like you're not going to remember anything when you come back.
Yeah.
Wow. Do you think that's why some people who are clinically dead and then revive say they haven't had an NDE? Do you think they had one and don't remember it?
I do. Or at least I think it's likely. Absolutely. Because we all have this trajectory that we're on in life, right? For me, it was interesting. It was actually a spiritually transformative moment for me. And it happened about a year and a half into the work that I was doing with the Other Side NDE, where I was sitting there and I was thinking about my past, right? And it was like every single moment in my life that was relevant just kind of illuminated in my memory all at once. And I realized that there was this thread that connected all of these events. And it was the near-death experience work that I'm doing today. But I had no idea that these things were all connected. It was just, well, these are my interests, and this is just who I am, and yada, yada. But when I had that eye-opening moment, it was like, oh my goodness, this was always the plan. This was always going to be my purpose. And so if I would have been given that information, it would have taken me off the path of authentically discovering that for myself.
Yeah, there was something about when you start doing this research or however you approach it, it feels like you're meant to do it. And like little things from previous experiences in life kind of add up. I'm like, oh, that makes sense now. That makes sense now, you know? And so,
oh man, I have so much. I feel like I would love to just like detail that whole thread, and because it's profound. I mean, to me at least, it is my experience, so I might be biased, but I think looking at it, it's undeniable that this is what I'm supposed to be doing.
what were you doing when you had that? I guess they're called spiritually transformative experience, STE, remeditating, or did it just happen?
I was interviewing a friend. It happened in an interview.
Oh shit. Were you able just to continue? Or were you like, I'm sorry, we're gonna have to like redo this?
No, I just kept going. I got very excited. I mean, it's probably my least favorite interview on my channel because, first of all, I was interviewing a friend of mine. He had awful audio. It was just it wasn't as professional as I come across in all my other videos because he was my personal friend, and so it was really sloppy. And like I said, I had a spiritually transformative experience in the conversation. It was a bit wild, but I mean I tried to explain some of it that has further been integrated and understood beyond that point too, but. It was during an interview.
Oh my God. Oh, maybe that'll happen to me. But then I'd have to probably have a terrible interview, which I don't want to have. But,
yeah.
I mean, I guess I've had lots of weird things along the way, that like, if you read my books, you've seen them, like, just things, especially early on, where I was like, no, that's not possible. What the fuck, Yeah, it's like interesting when you say, too, about how, like, people don't remember things because, I mean, maybe NDEs, I mean, a much milder scale, but like, again, I write about this in my first book. I had a dream where like all these like waves and energies were pounding through me. And it was like, I saw this medium and this strength theorist. And before I even knew them, well, I haven't gotten to know Dr. Lisa Randall, the strength theorist, but I've gotten to know the medium. And it was like, I mean, I'm not going to go into all here because I think a lot of people already read it, but it was just so weird because it didn't fit into any of my understanding, but it was like this profound, it was so physical, feeling these like light waves pounding through me as if this medium and string theorist were there both telling this to me. I hadn't like known either of them at all at this point, except just reading their books. And it was just so weird that, because it was so powerful when I remembered it later, but it wasn't that I didn't remember it. I just never thought about it. Like it didn't register in my brain in some way when that happened until I went further with all this research and then started trying to have experiences myself, like trying to do out of body experiences. And then it was like this memory came back and like the physiological sensations were the same. And it was just like, that was so powerful. How did I not remember that? And it was like, I came back from that feeling. It was the most physical sensations I've ever had in a dream. And it was like, I suddenly had this profound understanding that string theory and mediumship and all of that were really saying the same thing. It's just so, yeah, it's weird. Like, and that's how I can sort of understand also how people maybe don't remember these very transformative experiences until another time, in whatever form they might remember them, even if they don't have memories that they consciously can put into words. And if you think about it, like we probably have so many memories from pre-speech times of our lives that we don't know our memories. I mean, we don't have the vocabulary around them. It's just like a visceral something in our body or some reaction to something or some emotion, like from our pre-language days,
I also feel like it's a very interesting balance when people in your life are going through really difficult things. We always have this urge to try to save them from their own discomfort, right? And I think that if we were to try to remove somebody's pain or suffering or issues or whatever, that we would ultimately be removing what they need to experience in order to come to that acceptance or that enlightened aha moment of understanding. Like what you just explained, it reminds me of the connect the dot photo. When you look at it, it's just a bunch of dots, but then you draw a line and then you draw another line connecting the dots. And then at the end, you can see the picture, right? And so we always want to try to save people and we want to always, all these things, but you'd be taking away their canon events, essentially. Like we can try to stop somebody from falling in a hole, and I think that you should to an extent, but like if they do fall into it, it's potentially what they need, and it's like, who are we to determine that for people? And so I think it's really interesting, or I think it's really important for people to allow people experience, and this is essentially that. I feel like when we don't remember, it's like Source is allowing our experience to unfold naturally so that we can come to our own conclusions. We can learn our lessons and have those enlightening aha moments, right? That come through the discomfort. It's like sometimes suffering is the way out, That's why it's important to not just lean into the light, and not just embrace the light side of things, but to grow an appreciation of the darkness. And it's that balance between the two that's really important.
Yeah, and to be honest, we don't really have a choice, even if you want to not experience certain things, or if you want to take away certain pains from people, like there's some things you can help with, but you're not going to help a lot of things. You can't help stop someone from dying. You can't help, like if you fall out of love with someone, or if your best friend's boyfriend falls out of love with them. There are just some things you absolutely have no control over. I'd say most things, you can do work to try to live in a kind way and help others and live to, help humans and animals, but you can only do so much,
Yeah, I think the issue with it isn't necessarily in, our, well, that's not true. I was going to say isn't necessarily in our approach, but the issue is mainly when you lose your peace over trying to save somebody else from their discomfort, right? Like, for example, my mom, she was stressing really bad over one of my stepsister's experience. And I was like, well, hold on. What if this experience is what she needs? What if that's what's going to finally be the thing that like creates that awakening experience? So don't lose your stress don't lose your peace over somebody's like conflict when you don't know how profound that conflict may unfold in a powerful and positive way for them. The best thing you can do is try to support and try to listen and be present and to love that person, but don't lose your peace over the darkness in life. There's a lot of it. Yeah. But it's not as terrible and awful as people tend to see it as.
Yeah. I remember my dad just passed, a friend of mine saying to me, and this is kind of like at the start of my book, she was like saying to me, I know you feel like everything's ending right now. And she's like, but you remind me of the opening scene of a movie where the characters think their whole lives have fallen apart, but it's really just starting. And I'm just like, I get like chills when I remember that, because it ended up being so true with, finding all this. And not that I necessarily would make the choice. I'd rather have my dad, but nothing's been better in my life and more transformative than learning about afterlife evidence. And the people I've met, it's absolutely transformed my life in almost every way imaginable. So, and all for the better, although, that's also balanced by not having my dad. So it's like I have more pain and more joy,
Yeah, but you have embraced the whole experience and not just the experience that feels good.
Yeah. I mean, I didn't have a choice. If I could just have the part that feels good, I would take it. But,
I wouldn't. Personally.
You wouldn't? Oh, really?
No. I don't know. Call me a masochist, but I genuinely appreciate having experiences that destroy me. First of all, I mean, I'm an artist. I'm an artist and I'm a poet too. So I transmute it. I alchemize that suffering into something beautiful. And I think that's probably a big reason as to why I see it that way.
I was going to say, in one sense, I'm glad I feel pain, in the sense that you see a lot of toxic positivity where people are like, oh no, gratitude, yeah. And I have my personal opinions on gratitude. I think most people don't agree with me. I'm not the biggest fan of it, but I think most people will say otherwise, and I'm probably missing out on something really great. But I feel like a lot of it, it's always feeling good. You can choose how you feel about situations. And I think having bad feelings are signals that something's wrong, and it feels bad enough that it causes you to do something about it. So I think bad feelings are directions. You're on the wrong path. You're with unhealthy people. You're in a career that doesn't align with you. Something's missing. And it's those are the things that help guide you towards the life that's really aligned with you. And so for me, yes, I like having negative feelings that I can do something about when something's wrong. Grief, you can't do a damn thing about. But I guess if I hadn't felt the torture of grief, I wouldn't have gone on this path, which feels like the path I was meant to do. So it's
absolutely.
It's it's probably why as humans we don't get to make all these choices. Because if I had the choice, I would never lost my dad, of course, but
absolutely. So I want to tell a story. So it is the parable of the Chinese farmer. Have you heard it?
Maybe. I don't know.
That's funny because the way that I originally heard it, it was called Who Knows What's Good or Bad, right? But Alan Watts does a segment on it, and instead of it being Who Knows What's Good or Bad, he called it Maybe, right? So it's funny that you're like, maybe I've heard it. Anyway, I'm going to start telling you.
Okay.
So there's a farmer, right? A Chinese farmer. He lives on his farm with his son. And one morning he woke up and he went to plow the field, right? But he discovered that one of his horses escaped the stable. And all the townspeople came around and was just like, oh, we're so sorry for your misfortune. But the farmer shrugged his shoulders and said, who knows what's good or bad? So then the next day, the horse had returned, and it brought with it another horse from the enemy neighboring state. And everyone came around and was just like, oh my gosh, let's celebrate your wonderful fortune. And he just shrugged his shoulders and said, who knows what's good or bad? Later that day, his son was out on the new horse trying to break it in. And he was bucked off the horse and broke his leg. And the townspeople came around again and said, oh, we're so sorry for your misfortune. And the farmer shrugged his shoulders and said, who knows what's good or bad? And the following day, the military rolls in and is taking all the young able-bodied men to go fight in the war against the enemy neighboring state. And they took one look at his son and said, you are not fit for war, and left him behind. And all the people came around again and said, what great fortune has come upon you. Your son gets to stay and live out the rest of his life, while all of our sons are likely to never return. And the farmer again shrugs his shoulders and says, who knows what's good or bad? So the moral of the story is we can try to attach these judgments to our experience, but oftentimes the things that happen to us that we judge as negative have profoundly positive impacts on us. And the things that happen to us that we think are sent directly from God and they're amazing, oftentimes end up shattering us in the end, which then can be alchemized into something profound and positive. So it's a futile effort for us to be judging whether something is good or bad, and to just recognize that within everything there is good and there is bad. And to appreciate all experience, no matter what level of comfort that is, no matter what that looks like, and recognize that it's part of the journey. It's a beautiful one.
Yeah, I have heard that. I love that. Yeah, it's very wise. And yeah, well, thank you for sharing that. And that is a perfect story to close on. So can you remind our listeners where they can find you, follow you, listen to all your podcasts?
Yeah, absolutely. So the Other Side NDE and Ethereality are both on YouTube and podcast streaming platforms. I believe you can find Crossing Over just on YouTube, Crossing Over NDE. But yeah, that's where you find me.
Great. And all the links will be in the show notes. Thank you so much, Nella. I so enjoyed getting to sit and talk with you, and hopefully I'll see you next year at IANDS.
Oh, absolutely.
If you want to learn how I went from being a skeptical atheist who thought there was zero chance of an afterlife to a skeptical atheist who thinks an afterlife is highly probable, come check out my books. WTF Just Happened. To get more information on what the fuck just happened, go to WTFJustHappened.net. There you can order my book, WTF Just Happened, A Sciencey Skeptic Explores Grief, Healing, and Evidence of an Afterlife. You can learn all about how I came to conclude that there most likely is an afterlife, but you can also learn about the early stages of my grief and the amazing, fascinating people I met along the way. You can read about how much I harassed the mediums and scientists trying to get evidence to see if the mediums were cheating and see if what everyone was saying actually was true. You can also subscribe to our newsletter to stay updated on any new developments and any interesting new what the fuck updates. So if you enjoyed this episode, please rate and review us wherever you get your podcasts. It makes such a difference, especially for a new podcast like this one. And if any of you have had a crazy what the fuck yourself, have any questions, feedback, or just want to say hey, reach out on either Instagram at WTF_just_happened_, or email me at hello@WTFJustHappened.net. I love hearing from all of you. It makes my day hearing your stories and questions and feedback and all of it. And remember, you don't have to draw any final conclusions as you wonder, what the fuck just happened?